Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick Connor. I'm Director of Student Engagement and Data at Montpelier Roxbury Public Schools. I am also a McKinney-Vento liaison for our district. We talked about McKinney-Vento a little bit earlier, but to be clear, McKinney-Vento is really the name of the legislation that ensures that we are supporting young people experiencing homelessness, young people who are unhoused, and really doing everything we can as schools to ensure stability for our students that may have some level of housing instability. And so in my role here in Montpelier, I get to do a couple of things. I have the opportunity to work alongside many of our families. I also get to work on a lot of things to do with data. And I'm really happy to be here with you all today to kind of really talk about how we merge the two and really lift up the experience of our students and families, and also talk about how does the data help us shape what we're doing about it. And so I always kind of want to start with sharing a bit about the young people and the families that I get to work alongside. And so I'll share a couple of stories of some of our students in Montpelier, and I've changed their names, but today we're going to talk about Sarah and Greg and Chris. And I always talk about Sarah when I get to speak in any setting. Sarah's a kid that I remember quite well. She was a student who I had just started in our school district. I was in charge of attendance. And this was a student who wasn't coming to school much. They were in first grade. They were coming in late a lot, and the school called me. They said, "Hey, Nick, this kid's not coming to school. We need some help. What do we do here?" And I was like, "No worries. I have a flow chart. I know exactly what to do." And so I would call the family, and we would send letters about attendance, and I'd wait at the school to try and meet with mom and get a better understanding of how we can help them. And this went on for about 2 months, and we never saw really anything kind of bounce back. We never saw Sarah start really coming to school more consistently, and I could never reach mom. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to show up at the house and say hi. And I did. And mom poked her head out the window, and she was like, "Hey, who are you?" I was like, "I'm Nick. I'm here from the school." She's like, "Yeah, I know. I'll call you later. I'm up here with a baby." I was like, "Oh, okay." She didn't call me later. A couple days later, I kept working the phone. I kept working the phone. Finally, she picks up, and I don't know why I said, "Can I walk with you tomorrow to school?" And she was like, "I could use the help." I didn't know what that meant. Um, and so I showed up the next morning, and Sarah comes running out, full speed ahead, runs right into me. It was like, "Let's go." I was like, "Cool, this is going to be a great walk. I'm going to talk about all the things with mom, and we're really going to turn this around. And I'm going to let mom know how important school is and really talk to her about what it means to be on time." Behind Sarah came a younger sibling who I didn't know. He came running out too, and I was like, "Oh, who's this?" Like, "It's my little brother." I was like, "Cool, we're all going to watch school together. Great." Behind little brother came another little sibling who had one of those backpacks with the leash, and mom was carrying that one and pushing a stroller with a new baby. And I was like, "Wow, okay, well, let's go. Let's walk to school." I'm still going to tell mom all the things I have to tell her from a school perspective of how important attendance is. Well, it was everything I could do, right, to keep us going in the same direction and keep the kids from running into the road and walking up the hill on a cold day in November. And so finally we get to school, and I'm thinking, this is awesome. The school's probably going to throw me a parade because I got this kid to school. This is great. And instead, when we walked in, our front office folks, who I love, and this would have been me the day before, looked at us and then looked at the clock, and we were 10 minutes late. And that was our greeting, was that we were 10 minutes late, and that was disappointing. I tell this story because when we are talking about working with families and students, whether there is housing instability or other things going on, we don't really understand the story behind what's happening. That journey from home to school might as well have been 10 miles. Uh, the effort that it was taking for that family to get to school was Herculean in ways that many of our families are not actually needing to work that hard. But yet, this family was greeted with disappointment. This family was greeted with letters talking about truancy, saying the family, like, this student has an IEP, they aren't really caring about their services, and none of that could have been further from the truth. So I share this story from the context of, like, literally walking with the family was a way that helped us understand and shape our district policy. What I will add to this is that while I often share that component of the story, I also want to name, when I share that story, folks will often come to me and say, "Oh, how's Sarah? How's Sarah?" The reality is, I don't know. A few months later, After we did a lot of work and we actually got a bus to be picking up at this house in ways that it wasn't able to before because of the logistics of being within a mile of school, they were evicted and went on to be in a motel. And they were in 3 or 4 different motels over the next 6 months. And so all of the work that that young person had been doing, that family had been doing to build relationship connection in school, now is in a place where the mobility is so high that when you don't know where you're sleeping tomorrow night, how can we expect you to be in school every single day? This family was eventually they eventually needed to be in a motel down in Bennington, and so at that point, that student unenrolled from our district. And I share that from the context of with housing, that was tough. With housing, those pieces were really difficult for that young person to be able to get to school every day. Without housing, it's times 10, right? So there's 2 other students that I will share about. One of my students, we'll call him Greg. Greg is another student who was in 2nd grade. He was a big kid, and he would like lumber down the hallway, and he was in 1st grade, and give you just whether you wanted or not, he'd give you a big hug, and then we'd have to have this talk about how we touch each other. But like he was just such a great like joyful kid, and he was a student who was first came to us because he was living in a local motel with his mom and dad. And this family moved to 7 different hotels over the next year. They were often told with very little warning that they needed to be out into the next hotel. And that could be in another city over, that could be 2 towns over, but they had to pack all their stuff, get there. As a school for McKinney-Vento, it's our responsibility to ensure that that young person has school stability. So we were driving every day with Greg, getting him to and from school. And oftentimes it would be me who would be doing the driving because the mobility was such that we couldn't plan a bus or a taxi in some ways like some school districts do because the mobility was such that it was always a different place. And it was not uncommon that on some weekends, I would take Greg to the Walmart parking lot where he would be living with his family that weekend. And Greg would just have this defeated look on his face when I dropped him off there for the weekend. And then I will have a teacher 2 weeks down the line come and talk to me and be like, yeah, Greg's reading has really fallen off. I'm like, that makes sense. Let's understand the context here of Greg. And so this is another example of how, like, from a school perspective, we really do try to do everything we can to find stability for our students and young people, despite the high mobility. The last student I'll share with you is student Chris. Chris started with us last year. He is in 2nd grade. Last year, Chris was not able to access his classroom at all. It was not uncommon for Chris to be in a space, pull every book off the shelf, throw it across the class, turn over furniture. He had some really hard days last year, and every day he was with a one-on-one instructional assistant to support him navigate his day, but very rarely was he able to be in the classroom. During this time, Chris, they had to give up their family dog, who was like Chris's best friend, because some of the motels would not allow pets to be there. We had to transition how we did our meals program because when families are staying in hotels, the only thing they had access to was a microwave. Every bit of food had to be microwavable. So we had to change how we're doing this work and delivering food to our families. Over the summer, this past summer, Chris and his mom got stable housing. They are in an apartment, and when I took Chris home the first day to his new apartment, he was begging me to come inside to show me that he had his very own room for the first time ever. It was beautiful. It was like awesome to see Chris light up. They had a full fridge. This year, Chris is in his class every single day. He has not had a single incident like we saw last year. The ability for this young person to know where he's sleeping tonight, for mom to be able to know exactly this is the permanency that we have and this is how we're going to move forward, has totally changed how Chris is able to show up in the classroom, how Chris is able to show up in school. And so I share these 3 stories from the place of, to go back to the start, any of us who have the opportunity to work alongside families, any of us who are working on policy, any of us who are working on data, take a walk with your families. It is where you will see how you can make change. Lift up and center the voices of our families. They know better than we do. And so when you have an opportunity to walk with your family, I would just encourage you, take every chance you can to walk with that family.